The loss of a loved one is always traumatic, but even more so when that person is the only one you really love. That happened to a 20-year-old girl named Sierra. She had been living with her Aunt Monica all her life. She had been in charge of taking care of her and giving her an education. Her parents had abandoned her when she was only 2 years old. They were very young and involved in strange matters. So when they left, her aunt did not hesitate for a moment to take care of the little girl. Monica had just turned 18. But with a lot of effort, she became a good mother. Sierra's grandparents had left a good inheritance. So initially, they didn't have to worry too much about money. In any case, Monica worked 4 hours a day to ensure that they still had an income and would not be left on the street. They lived in the family home, a 2-story apartment located in the center of the city. There, the two of them built their home together and were very happy. Despite Monica's youth, she had a great sense of responsibility. This may have been due to the early loss of her parents. From an early age, she had had to fend for herself. And it also showed in her behavior as Sierra's mother. As the little girl grew up, her aunt talked to her about the history of her family. It was clear to her that she didn't want to keep anything from her. So at the age of 10, Sierra knew exactly what had happened to her parents and why the two of them were alone. Years later, she was deeply grateful for her aunt's honesty. It allowed her to have a clear vision of everything from a very young age and to act accordingly. Together, they formed a family of 2, told each other everything, and loved each other very much. So, when Monica fell ill at the age of 38, Sierra collapsed. One afternoon, they were having tea in the kitchen when her aunt told her she was ill. Within seconds, she was on the floor. She had fainted. Nothing had ever happened to her before, so they quickly went to a health center. They examined her and told her that it was probably a sugar crash. But the story repeated itself a couple more times in a few weeks, so the doctors decided to do more specific tests. The result was devastating for them. Monica had cancer, a very advanced brain tumor in an area that was difficult to operate on. When Sierra heard this, she thought she was going to faint too. They went home together and cried for several days in a row. Neither of them had the strength to comfort the other. It was time to cry in silence. When they had no more tears left, they sat down to decide whether Monica was going to have surgery or not. The chances of getting out of the operation alive were slim, but if she didn't have the operation, she would only have a few months to live, and they didn't know in what condition. Sierra wanted to spend more time with her, so she preferred to try some alternative therapy. The operation was too risky, and she didn't want to be left without her mother. But Monica wanted to try to live well, or not at all. Therefore, she made the decision to undergo surgery. The days that passed until that moment, they did not leave the house. They spent time together, cuddling on the couch and looking at old photos. But even so, the days passed quickly, and soon they had to say goodbye. They decided to do it normally, as if they were certain that in a few hours they would return home together. But the worst predictions came true, and Monica did not survive the operation. When the doctor came out into the hallway to give her the news, Sierra was unable to react. She did not do so until she could say goodbye to her body. Then, once all the formalities were over, she locked herself in her house, and it took her more than 2 months to come out. Her grief was so great that she could not imagine her life from that moment on. Then one day, while tidying her room, she found a letter. It was from her Aunt Monica. In it, she told her that in spite of her sadness, she should go ahead for both of them. She also told her that she always would be with her, even if she didn't notice her. Monica ended the letter telling her, "I will always worry about you. I'll always be wondering where you are or what you're doing. I will never leave you alone." Sierra hugged the letter as if it were the only precious thing she had left, and so she fell into a deep sleep. The next morning when she woke up, she decided that she had to go get ahead and do things. She resumed her studies, cleaned the house, and made it a point to take daily walks in the park. She managed to get out of bed, but she was still sad. Everything she did out of obligation and not for pleasure. This was very noticeable in the way she related to other people. It was evident that she was apathetic, that she just wanted to be at home and alone. Her friends tried to cheer her up in 1,000 ways, but nothing worked. In the end, they opted to give her time and space. Perhaps solitude would help heal her wounds. But things just kept getting worse and worse. And one night, Sierra took out her writing notebook to see if writing would distract her. But as soon as she opened it, she noticed a note she hadn't written. In one little corner, she read, "Where are you, princess?" And tears began to stream down her face. Her aunt had left that note to give her strength. No doubt, she thought of everything. That made her smile, and for the first time since her death, she slept through the night. In the morning, she got up in a much better mood and faced her classes more concentrated and attentive. Her friends were happy to see her taking notes, or when they saw her appear in the cafeteria. It seemed to be going much better. The next few weeks were pretty good. Sierra started spending more time with her friends, stopped crying all the time, and was even eating somewhat normally. Life seemed to be getting back on track, and she got back into her routine to some extent. Exam time came, and although her grades dropped, she did not fail any subjects. It was quite an achievement, so her teachers congratulated her. They were all very proud of her. She had not had an easy life and was excelling herself. The day they handed her the report card, she didn't even look at it. She put it in her bag and left it on the table in her living room. In the evening, out of curiosity, she opened it to see what her teachers had commented on the report card. But as soon as she opened it, she read something that left her frozen. In one corner of the paper was written, "Where are you, princess?" This time the sentence did not make her happy but afraid. The paper came straight from the university. No one else in theory had opened it. It was clear that her teacher would not have played that tasteless joke on her. And although she liked to believe that her aunt was accompanying her, she didn't believe in spirits or that they could leave notes after death. For the next few days, she thought about what had happened. She couldn't find any logical explanation, and she couldn't ask anyone for advice. So she simply decided to pretend that nothing had happened. She tried to go on with her life, but after a couple of days, something strange happened again. As she did every week, she stopped at a nearby supermarket and left the receipt on the kitchen table. She always kept them for a few days in case something was wrong. Well, the day after she left it there, a new note appeared on it. Again, "Where are you, princess?" Her heart began to beat very fast. She was scared. Could spirits really leave notes, she thought? But suddenly she noticed one thing. The handwriting resembled her aunt's but was not identical. The type of interrogation made her suspicious, so she ran to look at the first note, and indeed they were different. They had not been written by the same person. That was a relief for ruling out the spirit. But it was a terror because someone was sneaking into her house. She didn't know what to do, whether to call the police who would think she was crazy, or to try to find out something on her own. She decided to do the latter for a few days. To do this, the first step was to pretend to leave the house but to keep watch. She did so the next day. As she did every morning, she pretended to go to class, even going so far as to get on a bus. But instead of going to school, she got off at the first stop and walked back. Then she went into the cafe right in front of the building and kept watch. Half an hour later, she saw a disheveled-looking man and woman enter the building. She thought it had to be them. She knew the rest of the neighbors, so she left the cafe and crossed the street. She thought that now was the time to call the police. So as she was walking, she reported that someone had broken into her house and given her the address. On the other end of the phone, she was told that she was not to do anything, and under no circumstances should she enter the house. But she paid no attention, and in barely 2 minutes she was in the elevator that would take her to her apartment. In any case, she decided to get off at the bottom floor, so as not to arouse suspicion. She made the last stretch on foot, and when she got upstairs, she found that the door was open, but not forced. Whoever those people were, they had a key. Sierra at that moment did not think about anything. She just wanted to know the truth. So without further ado, she entered the house and asked who was there. At first, no one answered her. The house was completely silent. But after asking again, she was met with a tremendous blow to the back of the head. It was so hard that she barely had time to put her hands before she fell to the ground. She lost consciousness, and when she woke up in her house, there were only 3 policemen. There was no trace of the 2 people who had broken in. The police told her that she had committed a reckless act, and that was why they had not caught them. She thought that maybe they were right, but she didn't have the strength to think about it too much. She didn't understand why this was happening to her at that very moment. They offered her a hotel until they found the culprits. But that house was all she had left of her aunt's, so she said she would stay. What they did do was change the lock on the entrance. If they came back, they would have to force the door. Also, a police officer would watch the area for a few days. They didn't have to wait that long. That same night at about 3 o'clock in the morning, Sierra heard someone picking the lock on the front door. Once again, she was completely terrified. She called the police to tell them what was happening. They told her that the police officer in the area was refueling, but would be right over to her address. But whoever was on the other side of the door acted very quickly. In just a few minutes, she heard the door open. She grabbed a knife from the kitchen and huddled at the window overlooking the street. As she waited there to learn the identity of the people who had entered her house, all she could think of was her aunt. Had she been there, she would protect her. She would know what to do. Then she closed her eyes with all her strength. But her curiosity got the better of her, and she opened them again to find herself face to face with that man and that woman. They were both looking at her from the front, without hiding their faces. Her face looked familiar, but she couldn't tell who it was. She soon found out. The woman greeted her saying, "Hello, daughter. Is this how you imagined your parents?" She was completely stunned and said, "I don't have parents." That completely infuriated the man, who pulled out a gun and put it right to her head. "If you were my parents, you wouldn't be here," Sierra said. The lady replied, "This house is as much ours as it is yours. You chose her, and now you're going to give us her house." Sierra could not get over her astonishment. All this was for a house. Her parents only wanted the house, not her. At that moment, the police sirens began to be heard in the distance. The man became nervous and wanted to act now. The woman began to hesitate. So Sierra turned to her and asked why she had been abandoned. She was 2 years old. She had not had a choice. The woman hesitated for a moment and told her that this was a lie, that the family had forced her to run away. But Sierra had seen the letters and other evidence that this was not true. Then she began to relate everything she knew aloud. The woman was breaking down more by the minute, until they heard the policeman coming up the stairs. Then the father, in a fit of rage, raised his gun and pointed it at his daughter. But the woman was quicker and placed herself between them. She gave him an accurate shot in the heart. Sierra could not believe what she was living. Her mother had saved her life. And he, seeing what he had done, jumped out the window. When the police arrived at the apartment, they found Sierra totally destroyed, staring unblinkingly at her mother's body.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it. And if you want to see more Draw My Life videos, subscribe to our channel. See you on the next episode.